And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the Finer Print live stream number 3 with Timothy Lim. Today we have a panel, a very small panel, but a very nice panel nonetheless. I have Mr. Zero Cool Daydell Murphy. Say hello. And his mic is muted.
Hello, everybody out there in TV land.
And we also have the gracious and vivacious Viper Sword 100.
I'm none of those things, but hi.
And our guest of honor, Mr. Dr. Timothy Lim.
Hello.
And before we start, Tim has asked me to do this for him just in order to protect him. This is a legal thing, so I'm going to read a disclaimer. Dr. Timothy Lim is the author and illustrator of Thump, the First Bundred Days. The views and opinions expressed by Dr. Lim are his alone and do not reflect upon those of the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences or the University of Arkansas Little Rock. In accordance with the Hatch Act, this interview is conducted off public property and in no official connection to any university function. So, now that that's out of the way, you are a comic book artist. Give us a little bit of a bio on yourself.
Sure. I worked in the merchandising sector doing art and illustration for licenses such as Marvel, Lucasfilm, and Hasbro. I didn't actually transition into the comic book field until about 2 years ago, doing variant covers primarily for IDW. So my first cover was Back to the Future. I don't really do interiors for comics. I've been approached by it many times to do sequential work. I am far too slow to do any of that, but I'm pretty much open for any freelance activities or freelance art that needs to be done. So since then, I've been doing covers for IDW. I did a cover for Dynamite's James Bond, #1. I did some colors for Valiant, Archer and Armstrong. My next book, which is also by Valiant, comes out tomorrow. It's an exclusive for Doubleheader. It's Bloodshot Salvation, #1. And then my next comic coming out, cover-wise, is going to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Ghostbusters Volume 2. Yes, there was a Volume 1, and it's coming out in November. I think it's the first week of November, and that's going to be a Heroes and Fantasies exclusive cover. So that's as far as my comic book experience is concerned. As far as my professional resume is concerned, as part of my job working in merchandising, I have to be pretty much up to speed on fandoms, and I've been doing that for about 6 or 7 years already, which means that I try to keep up with news and what's going on as far as all those universes are concerned.
Wow. And you're also a physician, a doctor, correct?
Yes and no. I'm actually not a physician. I am an audiologist. It is its own separate degree. It's called an AUD. The level of education that you have to get to attain it is not quite as extensive as an MD, a medical doctor. My wife is a surgeon, though. We have between the two of us, we have a pretty interesting perspective on the medical community. But my specialty is seeing and diagnosing patients for hearing loss, fitting them with hearing aids, helping them with therapy, and also vestibular function. And I also teach. So I teach in the graduate and undergraduate level.
Wow. Okay. And now you have another feather on your cap, which is or in your cap, which is you're a white supremacist, apparently.
I am, yeah. And I think it's kind of funny because I do speak German, and I haven't had a chance to dig into that or use that as part of my repertoire of comebacks. But to be honest, the blowback from the other side has not been so strong enough that I've been able to utilize them. But I'm not holding my breath. I have a suspicion that they're probably trying to dig up some dirt on me as we speak.
So speaking of that, can you shed us a little bit of light for anybody who's not initiated? What exactly happened with the Mary Sue?
Sure. So for those who might not know, the Mary Sue has been around for a number of years. Ironically, they actually wrote a couple of flattering articles about me over the years, attributing my merchandising art, and they spoke highly of me up until about 3 weeks ago when they wrote a scathing article talking about a lot of books being published by our publicist Post Hill, and under the blanket terminology of Nazis and white supremacists, they happened to include my book, Thump, The First Bundred Days, and they gave it the distinction as being their favorite of the lot. And they concluded by saying, Go home, Nazis, your alt-right books are not welcome here. The writer, and I'm guessing the editors, didn't even bother looking to see what my last name was. Otherwise, they would have guessed that my ethnicity probably wasn't white. And they would have also looked at their backlog of articles where they actually spoke pretty highly of me. One commenter even went so far as to call them out on it, saying, Lim, oh boy. And another commenter, both of which were vetted, replied, I am betting that that is just a white person who changed their name to sound more ethnic. Keep in mind that these were both vetted comments. We actually contacted the publisher because that's defamation, and we kind of
Say the
sat on
least.
it. Yeah, to say the least. We sat on it for 2 weeks. We thought to ourselves maybe there'd be a retraction. Maybe someone else would call them out on it. And finally, the publicist said, actually, we actually got a small spike in sales after that article came out. Why don't we just use that to our advantage? And why not just come out and call them out on it? And me, I actually don't like being a target. I'm not used to this. And so I said, well, if I'm gonna put myself out there anyway to get this book to the consciousness of Trump supporters and conservatives in general, heck, why not? So I put out the, I guess now infamous, hey, Mary Sue, do I look like a white supremacist to you? And the rest is history. I have a lot of respect, and I am very deeply appreciative of all the people who have come out and supported us. A lot of people who didn't even know that the book was available. It was really the push that we needed. And so when we published the thank you letter to the Mary Sue last Friday, it was actually half sarcastic but half truthful, because they actually did us quite a big favor by doing that.
Wow.
Well, you know what they say, no publicity is bad publicity, but unfortunately for Vivian Kane, who wrote the article on August 31st of this year, she apparently didn't pay attention to your last name neither.
Correct. And you would think that that'd be important.
Well, that's kind of one of the things that when you go into a debate or you go into a live stream such as this, you try to know what you're talking about. Unfortunately for her, I can't speak for her, thankfully, but she apparently didn't see what you look like either. Now there seems to be the thing. Most oftentimes, when people say the word white supremacist, they think of basically skinheads, neo-Nazis, and Richard Spencer in the modern age. You, sir, are a far cry from that.
Yeah, thankfully. I don't look anything like any of those people.
So, and for the record, people out there in TV land, I have happened to have the joy of looking at Thump, the First Bundred Days, and it's all satire. And Saturday Night Live, since its inception, has been doing this. Every and any politician, as well as situation and person, is up for grabs in regards to comedic satire. And it's a bunny. Get over it.
Not just that, but if you've seen those pages, the book is fairly harmless. Yes, it is probably unequivocally a pro-Trump book, but if you look at the definition of satire, it's to offer a form of commentary. Some people, I think the biggest pushback that we've had is some people said, well, it's not technically satire because it paints Trump in a positive light. True, but see who it paints in a negative light. Satire will typically criticize one side or the other using humor to an extent to achieve its goal. And that's what we've done. I think when people think of, oh, it's a satire about Trump, their knee-jerk reaction is, oh, it's against him. And one of the reasons why we made this book was my wife had told me about this concept in business called the blue ocean. And it's this idea that sometimes when you're so focused on one market, you don't realize there's a big blue ocean out there that's kind of yours for the taking. And one thing that Brett and I had talked about was there are a lot of conservatives out there who are starving for entertainment that either caters to them or is so apolitical that they can enjoy it. And so that's what our goal was to capture that market and say, you know what, not every comics professional, not every artist out there is a liberal. This is material that we feel like we can give to them and say, it's clean entertainment. We designed it to be a G-rated book that you can read to your children, and you'll have a laugh if you're an adult. You'll get some of the adult humor in there that we've disguised. But as a kid, it comes across as very harmless humor. And so we're really proud about the end product that we have. And again, we thank the Mary Sue for the publicity that they gave us unintentionally.
Okay, now I was talking to Finer Print about this, and this is something that I did want to mention because I think it's poignant at this point in time in the conversation. Now, prior to coming on to the live stream and going live, I was telling you that I happen to know Max Allen Collins of Road to Perdition fame. If people don't know who he is, go check him out. But he took over for Chester Gould in 1977 to write for almost 20 years in regards to Dick Tracy. Now, the Dick Tracy comic strip is very pro-law and order, very pro-family values and justice and things to be served. But Mr. Collins himself is more of a centrist or more of a liberal as opposed to an actual conservative. So here's the thing. I once asked him, and I said, Mr. Collins, when you wrote for Dick Tracy, did you ever let your personal opinion get in the way of what you were doing? And what he turned around to me and says, Dade, when I was privileged enough to take over for Chester Gould being basically handpicked, I knew what I was getting into. Because I am more of a liberal, and by liberal, he's more the old school 1960s hippie type liberal, not what you would consider a social justice warrior or the far left of these days. He basically said, I knew what I was writing, and I had to keep that message maintained because that was the essence of the character. Now, for you, Mr. Lim, or Doctor, if you prefer, when you did all these covers, which if anybody go check out his DeviantArt page, by the way, and I hope you get that put in there. I've not seen one shred of evidence that basically is a pro-conservative side or a conservative mindset because you were doing a job that you were asked to do. Do you feel that people have strayed away from what it means to do an assignment, do it right the first time, and get too personal in regards to the comic book industry, or at least when they try to sell their art in an era where we have a president who won fair and square and is consistently being doled out nothing short of anti-American abuse by our countrymen?
Oh, your mic is muted, Tim. Tim? Timothy? All right, so he's his mic is muted for some reason.
I hope you heard that because I have no clue how to repeat all of what I've just said.
Well, no, I mean, look, not to answer for Tim. Oh, there he goes. Tim, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I don't know why it muted on its own. I didn't press anything on the screen, but I heard everything that you said. So let me answer that question. You can hear me, correct? Right now?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you loud.
So on a threefold basis, there's three ways I can answer that question, which was a very good one. The first one is a bit of advice that a friend of mine gave to me who is a lawyer at the University of Berkeley. And he said that the measure of a good writer is when you read something by that writer and you leave knowing more about the character. You know you've read a bad writer when all you learn about reading it is more about the author. And that's a problem that a lot of comics have nowadays, is I pick up a mainstream comic, quote unquote mainstream comic, and I leave there thinking to myself, I don't think I actually know the character. All I know is the author's point of view. It becomes so blatantly obvious that the character is just a mouthpiece for the author's perspective, for their opinion, that it really sours the whole batch. And I'll give you a very good example. One of my favorite runs as of late in the last decade was Garth Ennis's run on The Punisher. Now, Garth Ennis has flat out said, and is known in most social circles as being a fairly liberal guy. But if you look at his run on The Punisher, each of those characters is so well written that unless you actually went on social media to find out what his politics are, you would never know. he writes so good, and he leaves his personal opinion out of it, that he lets the characters kind of speak for themselves. And one of the things I've noticed in a lot of media nowadays is that the writers and artists have that bad tendency to want to interject their opinion into um, basically their work. And looking at some of my role models in terms of artistic development and what I want to be is, for example, Disney's 9 Old Men, Walt Disney, and the people who kind of help shape and create Walt Disney Studios. If you look at how they look like, they don't look like your typical artists. They don't look ragged with dreadlocks and strange colored hair, and the type of people who you can't tell are either homeless or hipsters or homeless hipsters. They look like normal men with solid and stable families who basically had this idea that we're going to go to work, we're going to do our job, and that's it. That's how we make our bread and butter. And for 7 years, that's what I did. I worked in merchandising, and I was given a task. I fulfilled it. And in a way, you can kind of think of that as being dispassionate, but I always saw art as kind of a technical job. And the idea was to produce something that was visually nice. I didn't really think that it was something defined by necessarily a message or politics or passion or whatever. It was just something to be done. And so in that regard, I think that's one thing that's really disheartening to see. The other one, which I have avoided, is sometimes you'll have a lot of professionals who are liberal, and that's okay. That's an opinion that if you have, that's fine. It's your right to have that, at least here in America. But they take it out on their fans to such an extent that they go on social media and they say things such as, if you voted for this president, you're a terrible human being and don't buy my book. And I would never say that. I mean, I would say to people, if you don't like Trump, you might not want to buy my book because I don't want to offend you. But I would never go out and say, hey, if you voted for Hillary Clinton, you're a monster and I don't want you to follow me. I want you to unfriend me and I want you to not buy my book. I don't do that because actually going into my work, I assume that most people are liberal. That's just because that's the environment that we work in. And so I learned pretty early on, don't alienate your fan base. First and foremost, don't insult them because you never know who you're going to run into. And the last thing I would want to do is insult fans who have probably paid me money for my services. The most I can do is just warn them and say, hey, I'm creating something that's political in nature. It's not necessarily an affront to you. It's not intended to insult you specifically. But I'm just telling you, if you don't want to buy it, that's fine. Completely understand, but it's no insult to you as a person or as a fan. I hope I can still have your patronage, but if not, I understand. I'm not going to demonize you in any way, shape, or form.
And that really seems to be the atmosphere that we have been living under for almost well, we're in the fourth quarter of the year technically, since we've been living since about November last year, and respectfully, that's why a lot of the candidates lost the spots that they were vying for, is because, you know, not to be crude, but they pissed on the little people, so to speak.
Yeah.
And to be honest, when the whole election was wrapping up, I went to bed thinking, oh, that's fine. I don't care. Hillary's going to be president tomorrow. I'll just start stocking up for the time we start problems with Putin and Russia and everything else, which that never came to pass. Because to be honest, a lot of people, they don't really remember the Cold War. They don't remember the end of the Cold War. They don't remember the Berlin Wall coming down. And it's like, I lived through this once. I don't want to go through it again. So when I woke up in the morning and it said, Donald J. Trump is now the president of the United States, 45th president, I believe. And I said, oh, well, I was going to start stocking up food and ammunition for a civil war. I might as well just do it again because now I'm going to have to deal with a bunch of people being crybabies. And not because they are crybabies. It's because, and I have run into a lot of friends who are liberals. I do have friends that are liberals. I have friends that are centrist. And they voted how they voted. And they made the point to mention, it's like, well, we're going to see America's true colors. And yeah, and that's what I was getting to. And ultimately, you don't do that. If you don't like somebody, that's fine, but you don't wreck your job. You don't sacrifice your bread and butter for ego. And a lot of people are doing that these days.
Yeah, they are, and uh, I say that, but then again, I also know to myself that if word hits certain people that I made this book, I know that that can cost me work, and I'm fine with that because I'm in that position where if someone doesn't want to hire me because of my politics, that's fine. Chances are I probably wouldn't want to work with that individual anyway if that's their attitude, if that's really what they want. But going back to what you said about kind of what happened, the collective meltdown that happened after November 8th of last year, because it's a very interesting um, topic in terms of where I'm coming from. I have my feet in two worlds, and they're both a rock and a hard place. And what I mean by that is academia, by its nature, is at least on the forefront very liberal. There are a lot of conservatives, but they're kind of hidden. They don't really say much. They're just not as outspoken. They're the type of people who know that their job is to educate, go home, collect a paycheck, go back to work, educate. And they're not the type of people who want to be Dead Poet Society and be inspirational leaders. They know that if their job is to teach biology, they teach biology, and then that's it. The thing that really got me was I was the opposite. I know it's anecdotal, but if you ask anyone close to me, they'll tell you. They said, Dr. Lim predicted the results of the November 8th election. And the way I did it was actually pretty simple. I'm not the smartest person at all. I actually know my limitations educationally. I know that there's a lot of places that I can improve on. But one thing I learned in basic statistics is how to actually interpret polling data. And there were at least three people off the top of my head. I know one was Helmut Norput. I know that not Bill Mitchell, Bill Still, who has a small YouTube channel, and I can't remember the third person. But these people, all they did every day was look at polls and analyze them and say these polls are skewed. Trump's going to win in a landslide. And I looked at those polls and I did the math and I said, oh my gosh, they're right. So objectively, I said, you know what? This is not going to turn out the way that everyone is saying. Just looking at the New Hampshire primary on its own and seeing how different that was, I was thinking to myself, okay, maybe I'm imagining things, but I think statistically Trump is going to win the election. And I was telling that to everyone. I even had my sister-in-law texting me frantically 5 hours before the polls closed, and she said, he's going to lose, isn't he? And I said, no, he's going to win, pretty sure. And it was being vindicated because I have a lot of people who are friends in academia, bigwig PhDs who make way more money than I do, and they were on their lofty high horse saying, "Oh, this is a shoo-in. Queen Hillary is going to be coronated because I am Dr. So-and-so, and I earn $200,000 a year, and I wrote a thesis on blah, blah, blah." And I think the most cathartic thing was on November 8th when they announced that he won. My phone blew up. It was just people saying, oh my gosh, like you called it, you were right. And like I said, I'm neither the smartest nor the most well-paid person necessarily in the university setting, but being vindicated against these bigwigs who were always saying that they were right. And artist professionals where my feed was nothing but artists and writers who think that they're smarter than other people. Just being able to say for once in my life that they were wrong and I was right and that I wasn't stupid, that I along with millions of Americans kind of saw this coming. There was something very cathartic about that. Scott Adams, who I'm guessing all of you here know, he's the author of Dilbert. If you followed him since 2015, he's been calling it. I mean, day by day, he just called it correctly. And one of the things that he mentioned was what we're witnessing right now is the biggest case of cognitive dissonance that probably we've ever witnessed in the United States. You have all these people who were convinced that they were smart and that they were right, and then something happens. So it's either A, they were stupid and they were wrong, or B, it was Russia. So that explains why you have this wave of kind of madness that's happening right now. And it's kind of a scary thing. I honestly thought that by now it would have kind of dissipated, but it hasn't. And so I mean, I hope that with time, obviously, we want passions to cool, but we still have at least 3 more years, if not 8. So we'll see how things go.
It's very reminiscent of 2 things for me on a personal level. The whole thing was I just loved everybody's attitude. Even my friends were like, Hillary's going to win. And I was just like, yeah, well, whatever, we'll see. And it turned out very much to be when, to use a Transformers parlance, when Starscream kicked Megatron out of Astro Train and tried to take over and Galvatron blew him away, that's what we saw.
Very appropriate analogy.
And yeah, but except we like Starscream. Secondly, my parents are not baby boomers. They were born in 1941 and 1943. They're the very old school Democrats to where people still got stuff done, and they hate hippies and all this other stuff. But they even said, there's no way Trump's going to win. I said, okay, that's fine. And my father, of all people, says, Dade, what are you going to do if he does win? I said, whatever, dude. I'm going to go back to work and pay my bills. And my dad's like, oh, okay, fair enough. And so when he did win, I got a call from my father and says, well, do you feel like rubbing it in? I said, Dad, I'm on a call right now. Can you bother me in 10 minutes? He never called me back for the rest of the night. I did get a text from my mom saying, I think he was waiting for you to say, I told you so. And I said, I've got better things to do than, tell at that time a 76-year-old man who just suffered a heart attack, I told you so. We can't afford to send him back to Iowa City.
No, I think that's, yeah, it's really amazing. One of the things that people say to me is they'll say, well, you make fun of people who react and you call them snowflakes. How would you like it if Hillary won? You'd be doing the same thing. And I even think some major publications, some magazines even had alluded to that prior to the victory. They said that there'd be riots in the street because Trump was elected. And obviously that happened, but not from Trump supporters. It happened from the left. But my answer to that was, well, I kind of anticipated that. And that's the difference. That's the difference between someone like me who did anticipate that this could go either way, and I was okay with it, even though I was hedging my bets on Trump winning because I was very confident in that. But to them, I said, we had that happen. We had it happen for 8 years with Romney and with John McCain. And in both situations, there were no riots because of both losses. And I went to bed that night, bummed out, obviously, but then it was a brand new day. And that's how typically these horse races in politics go, is you have this cycle of one side winning and then the other side losing. But if you look at even the Bush-Gore election from years ago, even then, the liberals just could not take that victory well. It was sour grapes with them, where it was all about hanging chads and how Florida was stolen. And so we look at that, and there's this pattern of the left where they're so high and mighty, in my opinion, with their overall viewpoint. They're so kind of full of their own intellectual expertise that there's no way they can be wrong. It has to be something else, some outlier that accounts for it. And like I said, it was one of those instances where you see it kind of full-blown in full display for everyone to see. It's embarrassing, really, to see it as such. But again, I hope that what I really feel is that President Trump is a very good persuader, and especially in light of things that have happened in recent weeks. I think that what a lot of people are looking for is some sort of false because, some way of kind of easing themselves into a more moderate position because they've embarrassed themselves so ridiculously over the last 9 months that all they want to do is just achieve a sense of normalcy once again.
They want normalcy in the way that they had it under Obama. And
Right.
The thing is, I've been alive since the days of Gerald Ford. And all throughout that time, and it's only been within the last 17 years, let's be honest, have I seen this childish type of mentality from either side and some centrist.
Yeah, you see it with the G20 riots and with the Occupy movement as well. You see it all over, but I don't think that we've seen the vitriol that we've been seeing over the last few months as much.
No, it's very true, but it's a generational thing because my aunts and my uncles are all baby boomers, and when Trump won, they're just like, well, that's just the way it goes. They're also of a mindset of they're retired, they have their money saved up, and to them it doesn't matter because for whatever reason. Now, myself being a Gen Xer, I didn't get to vote until Clinton was the first, until Bubba was in office. And I voted Democrat once, and I realized I'm an idiot. Because what I saw was, it wasn't because Bill overall was a bad president. It was because of something that my uncle Anthony said to me. He said, you do realize that the only reason the economy is great now is because it's rolling off the very tail end of Reagan and Bush, not Reaganomics, but Reagan and Bush.
Yeah.
And he was right. Because he said by the time that our next president comes along, it's going to basically plummet. And that's exactly what happened. And then people started pointing fingers, being more childish than two kids fighting in a sandbox. And I said, if this is how these people behave, I'm just going to stick my nose out of this and, everybody can piss off.
Yeah, and speaking of Bubba, he's actually from my home state. We actually have a joke around here, and I'm guessing if there's any listeners in Arkansas, they're going to get pretty mad when they hear me say this, but they know what I'm talking about. We had a joke for the longest time that we voted for Clinton just to get him out of Arkansas. And there's a reason why we never turned blue again. That was the last time that Arkansas as a state went blue. We kind of know the Clintons very well. There's a reason why she didn't campaign in Arkansas, despite the fact that our airport is named after her and her husband. And that is the truth. If you land in Arkansas, it's called the Bill and Hillary Clinton National Airport.
You poor souls.
What did you say?
You poor souls.
I know, right? So I think the mentality for a lot of people was that she was not a good candidate at all. And we should know. We knew her best. We knew her and her husband fairly well for all the years that they were here. And we were very glad, I think, to get them out.
Talk to us for a second about being an Asian conservative. How does that work? Because according to the left, you're not supposed to be a conservative.
Right. And that's one thing that it kind of infuriates me, because when I was growing up, I never referred to myself as Asian. I always referred to myself as an American. I was very lucky.
You are.
That's correct. And I grew up under a Reagan administration. I remember that there was a point in time when it was not unusual to walk around wearing something that was very Americana, whether that be a polo shirt that had the American flag on it. That was okay. And I distinctly remember it was in my college years that people kind of ridiculed that. They thought it was gaudy and tacky. And suddenly we have this case of being a hyphenated American. And it was very sad, because I never liked writing Asian on standardized tests. Like whenever I was in college and in my latter years of high school, I always asked myself, why do I have to tell them what ethnicity I am? I don't see why that's important. Later on, I figured out that kind of serves a dual purpose, one for demographic statistics and one really for scholarships. But I think what really blows people's mind is this. I'm an Asian American who lives in the South and who's Catholic. Now, you want to talk about a quadruple whammy. I think that's one reason why a lot of people on the left avoid me, because it kind of dispels their narrative. I'm a walking contradiction to what they think is how people should behave. And I even tell this to people. I say, they'll ask me, hey, has growing up in Arkansas really exposed you to racism? Have you encountered racism in any way, shape, or form? And I tell them, first of all, I say it depends on how you define racism. Because according to Webster's dictionary, racism is any type of racial prejudice that's based on a position of superiority, that you feel that your race is superior to someone else. And I say, I've had people call me names, but it's because they were jerks. It's not because they were racist. It's because they were the type of people who would call anyone a name. And they're the type of people who would probably beat their wives or catcall to women. So I don't even consider them racist. I consider them jerks. And I tell them morons. And the thing that really gets them, the one thing they don't like to hear is I say, the only people I have ever met who have ever been racist to me were liberals. And it was specifically one person that I have in mind who came to me on campus, and her father was running for a position with our government. And she said, "Have you voted for my father yet?" And I flat out told her,
Oh,
"Well,"
jeez.
I said, why would I vote for your father?" And she said, "Well, because he's all about the minorities, and you're a minority, so I figured that you would make the smart choice." And it was the way that she said it that, and this was early on in my college years, where I said, "I don't like your type. What party is he?" She said, "Democrat." And I said, "Well, I really don't like your type," because that's the most racist thing I've ever heard, where in a form of unintentional kindness, they pigeonhole you into a spot that is typically held by racist beliefs. It's kind of like on campus now, where you have safe spaces for minorities. So it's kind of
Ugh.
like, well, you have segregation by proxy. You're basically defeating the purpose that you strive for so diligently, and out of kindness, you're basically reintegrating those policies that um, that were railed against back in the '60s during the Civil War movement. So they really don't like it. And the one thing that really
You mean
bothered me
civil
was,
rights?
yeah, and
You
what really
said
bothered,
Civil War, sir.
oh, I'm sorry, civil rights. Sorry. Um, when during the campaign up until November the 8th, the thing that really bothered me was that people knew who I was voting for, but not a single liberal asked me why.
Huh.
They didn't care. None of them ever confronted me. You would think they'd call me a white supremacist then, and at least stop me and call me out on my misguided intentions before the election. But that never happened. They just assumed. I think in their mind, they just put me in that corner where I guess all other conservative minorities belong, and that's the end of it. And I think that's probably if they're not digging up dirt, that's probably the reason why the Mary Sue didn't respond. Because what can you say to that? I mean, you have Chelsea Handler, who called Ben Carson 3 days ago a black white supremacist. So if Chelsea Handler can say that about a high level uh, politician, a conservative African American, all bets are off, and it stands on its own. I mean, in the face of that nonsense, what other retort can you have?
Right. And actually, it segues nicely to the next bit that I kind of wanted to talk about. Tell us a little bit more about Thump. And I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
yeah, like where did the idea come from? Because we spoke about this with Brett over the weekend on a different stream.
Mhm.
Give us a bit of a background on how the idea came about, who came up with what, and all that stuff.
So Thump came about because, in all seriousness, my wife and I have rabbits, and my rabbit has long hair, and just one day he happened to have hair that looked like Donald Trump's, and and I thought to myself, this is pretty funny. I could definitely think of a character named Thump. But then there's other analogies that I thought, oh my gosh, everything is kind of setting into place, and this sounds like something that we could actually do. So think about it this way: you have, at least here in America, you have dogs and cats, which are pretty popular pets for domestication for families. But no one ever thinks of rabbits. People are always shocked when they find out that we have domesticated rabbits. So rabbits are not an unusual creature. Everyone heard about them. Everyone knows about them. You just don't think of them as being a domesticated pet that acts like a cat or a dog. And I thought to myself, well, Trump is kind of like that. Candidate Trump, everyone laughed whenever he announced his bid for the presidency. He's a household name. We all know who he is. And frankly, I never watched The Apprentice. I don't know. I didn't know anything about his character. But the more I thought about it, I thought, here's this underdog character who is set to become president of the United States. And here I am, I have rabbits. And one thing I've learned over 3 years of owning rabbits is that you can't underestimate them. They're a lot more clever than they look. And they're an underdog. They're considered a prey creature. And suddenly, within the span of 2 weeks, right after the election, I pretty much had this storyline laid out where I just thought we can have an analog for Trump. We can have him be a rabbit. And just like a rabbit, he'll be beset by predators because they're very good analogs for the mainstream media. They're very good analogs for just the alt left in general. And all his supporters, all the people who rally with him, they're all rabbits. And so in the book, you'll actually see that his companions are all rabbits. So you have Ben Carson, and in the book, I think we call him Bun Carson. So you have a rabbit that's literally wearing like a little tiny doctor's suit, and he's a rabbit. And then you have some people who I love, for example, Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh. Now, they're not rabbits, but they're actually depicted as other animals, but they wear rabbit ears. And the reason why is I wanted to be a visual analogy. They're not really Trump's base. They're not the people in the middle class. They're definitely very well paid, but they sympathize with the cause, and so they put rabbit ears on because they're one of us, so to speak. I have a really funny, in my opinion, I think it's one of the funniest illustrations in there, but it's Mitch McConnell, and he's a turtle because that's how he's always depicted, and he's wearing rabbit ears, but they're limp. Like you can tell that he's kind of a wishy-washy kind of character who can take those ears off at any given moment. So everything started clicking into place after that. Obviously, at some point, Brett came in to help edit some of the ideas that we had. And then my co-author, Mark Pellegrini, who writes all the couplets and the text, he came in with me to help kind of flesh out some of the ideas in more detail. One of the things that I'm not sure if Brett showed you an advanced copy of the book or not, there's a lot of prose. So even though online we mostly post the illustrations, there's actually a lot of text. So it takes you a little bit of time to actually read through it, but it's all in rhyme. So the whole book is done in rhyming verse. And,
yeah, I did see a few samples online, but I haven't seen the full book yet. I might actually order it online. So.
Oh yeah, or what you can do is just PM Brett, and I'm pretty sure that he'll be more than happy to send you a complimentary copy. Those will be coming in, I think, the first week of October, and we're already getting our lists ready in terms of who we're sending them to, in terms of the press circuit that we're going to be doing pretty hard starting next month.
Oh, you lucky bastard!
Speaking of sales, I understand that following the Mary Sue article, you guys experienced not just a small spike, you guys sold out, right?
Yes, we actually went into a second printing. I don't think I'm at liberty to say how much the initial printing was. It's just that we exceeded Post Hill's expectations. They were very happy, and they announced, they said, we have to go into a second printing. We've already sold out of our initial sales number. We were ranked last week in the top 20 in two categories, one for political satire and the other for political humor. We beat Reasons to Vote Democrat, which was the book filled with nothing but blank pages. We beat it by 2 spots, and that to me was very, very good. Considering that book got an endorsement from the president himself, being able to at least climb its spot for a couple of days was really good. And then we were 2 spots behind Milo Yiannopoulos' book, Dangerous. So it was exciting. We've been climbing that category, and now every day it's a horse race. We're always in the top 10,000 books of all time right now, ranked on Amazon. And it always starts out where we're like ranked 10,000 in the morning, 8,000 in the evening, and then it just fluctuates back and forth. So we've been having a pretty good run as of late. And now that we actually have an engaged Twitter following, I know Brett and I have been pretty aggressive in terms of using it. We actually, both of us, we didn't know how to use Twitter. I have had that account since January and didn't actually start picking up steam until now. And so it's really good that we've actually been able to get more followers and have been able to actually get engagement. That's actually the thing that we had been lacking.
Wow. That's actually really impressive.
Yeah, and considering that, again, we couldn't figure out the magical formula for Twitter. We don't actually know how it works because, for example, I'm on Instagram, and whenever I post art on Instagram, it's almost instantaneous reaction. People like it, and you don't have that on Twitter. I have 2 Twitter accounts. I have one for my general art page, and that typically I stay away from politics, and it's really hard to get an engagement. And then on Thump, by posting something now, I can easily guarantee that I'm going to get a handful of likes and some retweets from it. So again, I don't know if it's because of the number of people that you have, that it's kind of a snowball effect. The more people who follow you, the more likely you are to be retweeted. I know people who maybe have posted 100 times over the last year and only have maybe 200 followers, and they constantly get retweets and shares and likes. So being able to figure it out has been a balancing act, but between the 2 of us, we're starting to get the hang of it. I know there's going to be a little bit of missteps here and there, but overall, the engagement's been really good.
Very nice. Viper, did you have anything to add?
I've just been interested in listening to everything. There's not really much I can add except going back to the when Tim was explaining, you learn more about the author, and then it's a bad book or a bad comic, and I have been seeing that. For example, the America Chavez comic, or America, just to give an example for everybody, you learn more that she is a Latino lesbian more than you do than her actually being a character. You know, so I do understand where that's coming from, but no, there's not really a lot I can add.
Well, that's a very good example. I know that, I think the finer print, obviously, I think you follow diversity in comics, and
Yes.
there's a lot of very good aphorisms that he comes up with that a lot of conservatives in our community we share. He's kind of created these buzzwords that are great, and I don't think he actually sits up late at night trying to come up with them. I actually think that he's a bit of a genius in terms of how he comes up with these ideas. But one of the things that he said was, when you first meet someone, if the first thing you say to them when they ask you, tell me something interesting about yourself, if the first thing that you say to them is something that a census taker would ask for, you're a very boring person. Because, for example, when someone asks me, hi, my name is Joe, what's your name? I don't tell them, hi, my name is Dr. Timothy Lim, and I'm an Asian cisgender male. No one wants to hear that. That's a superficial characteristic that only a census taker would be interested in. I tell them, I'm Dr. Timothy Lim. I'm an audiologist. I do illustrations on the side. That, I think, is interesting to most people. Or I'm Betty Sue. I'm a homemaker, but on my side, I make enamel pins. That's very interesting. I've noticed that people who have to wear their diversity characteristics on their sleeve don't make for very interesting characters. And frankly, for the book, for America, I'm always tasked with being the guy who has to read that book and then tell my friends about it because they don't want to read it. They just want to know about what happens in it because, frankly, it's a terrible book. And I just tell them it's nothing but basically talking about how quote unquote brown people are good and they should quote unquote punch Nazis. I mean, that's pretty much what the whole book is about. Oh, and you have your unprobable lesbians popping up almost every issue. It doesn't even read as comics anymore. It reads as a propaganda piece.
And you see it.
That's exactly what my daughter said. Touching back, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
right.
You made a very valid point there, Mr. Lim. Touching back upon about how you introduce yourself, when somebody comes up to me and says, "Hey, I'm blah blah blah. Who are you?" And I say I'm Dade Murphy. I work as a third-tier CSR representative for Medicare, and that's on a professional level. And I don't go up to them and I say, "My name is Dade Murphy. I'm the father of a young lady who's a lesbian and serves in the United States Air Force," because people get insulted by that. And my daughter gets pissed off. And my daughter is very mellow. She's 5'5". She weighs about 115 pounds now that she's got muscle on her. She's quick as the Flash. And she knows who she is. And she doesn't like when people basically patronize her. And this is one of the reasons she stopped reading comic books, is because she felt that as a member of the LGBT, she's been overly patronized as a person. And she goes, I don't tell everybody that I'm a lesbian. And I go, well, that's none of their damn business. She goes, no. And I say, so what's your problem, sweetie? She goes, well, these kind of books piss me off because there's more to me than just that.
Right. And it's interesting because a very unique subset of the student community that I've met, as well as my colleagues, is I've met a handful of conservative homosexuals. And one in particular that I'm thinking of, who was one of my best students, I did not know that he was gay. Why? Because honestly, I did stereotype him. He fired ammunition on the weekends. He was kind of a bigger, burlier guy. He spoke very plain English. And when I found out that he was gay, one time we were at a conference, and I just flat out asked him. I had known him very well until that time, and I said, I didn't even know that you were gay. You don't really present it in the way that is stereotypically done. And I'm going to clean up his language because it was a lot more colorful in his response, but he basically said, that's not who I am. All it defines is who I like to have sex with. It is not me as a character, and I don't believe it's a culture. I don't like it as a culture. It honestly disgusts me. And one of my managers for my conventions, he actually has a sister who's a lesbian and who is actually also in the military. And she basically said the same thing. She voted for Trump as well as her partner. And I asked him, does she ever talk about that to other people? And he said, no, because it blows their minds. They don't want to hear it. They think it's antithetical. And especially when they talk to people in their community, they consider them a traitor. And I asked myself, based on how my experience with my colleague was, is this kind of Uncle Tom mentality that whenever there's someone who is in a subcategory who does something that's against the norm, just calling them an Uncle Tom or a traitor to their identity, I think that's just intellectual laziness. That is just avoiding kind of the more interesting question, which is why? As in, I'm interested. Please tell me why it is that you believe the way that you do, despite your sexual orientation, and they might surprise you. For example, if you're gay or you're lesbian, why did you vote for Trump? Maybe their answer is why not? He's been pretty friendly to the LGBTQ community. Why don't you tell me what he said or done that's against it? You'd be surprised in terms of the interaction that you'd get when you actually stop to listen to people instead of trying to demonize them or call them names.
And it does go back to the fact that people have these preconceived notions of a stereotype. Like with you, they would presume that you're automatically a liberal just because you're an American of Asian descent. They look at me being a white guy and they go, "Oh, well, you're obviously a racist because you're from Iowa or you're a hick or something." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm such a hick that I work for the government and I have a 130 IQ. I'm that stupid. Plus, I have a daughter who can fly planes and bomb your house from orbit if she felt necessary." Really? Right. No, absolutely not. None of your damn business, And that's what irritates people the most. And I think that's one of the things that the far left, especially, because let's be honest, when we say the term liberal these days, most people think the far left, not the old. Which, oddly enough, they don't think of the hippies or the 1960s or the civil rights movements and all. They think of the very far left as if you say a conservative, they're automatically gonna think, oh, you must be like a Nazi or something. It's like, no, I'm for America, for Americans, regardless of the skin tone, dipshit. Excuse my language, but that's basically what it means. And so when somebody says, oh, your daughter's a lesbian, I'm like, my daughter's my daughter. What's your point? Oh, you must have. And I've actually had people say, oh, you must have got mad when you found out. And I'm like, dude, you know nothing about me, do you?
Yep. And again, it all comes back to the narratives that are being pushed. And we touched upon this with Brett on the live stream on Saturday. Tim, maybe you can shed a little bit more light. When you work in the comic book industry, when you make comic book covers, how much of an intervention do you get from the editorial level to illustrate the characters in such a way so they can? I know you said you're not doing the internal comics, just the covers, but how much of an editorial are you getting from high up to say, depict this character like this?
It's actually, so working in merchandising and working in for comics doing covers, it depends on the company and it depends on who's editing it. I know that because of most of the work that I've been doing has been for IDW. They've actually been really good. I have only gotten maybe one or two comments saying that I need to change something, and they were very minor. They weren't terrible. They were easily fixed. It's funny though, because there's one cover I did recently, and I can't mention the company by name, but I think people who are listening can probably guess. But a lot of people are kind of shocked because some of the companies, their approvals are actually done by a team of lawyers, and the lawyers don't necessarily have a fan interest in mind. They're just wondering what is it on the cover that can can get us sued. So no depictions of violence, no depiction of weapons, things of that nature. And that happened quite recently, as a matter of fact, where I basically had to go through 5 cover reiterations, and each time, within a span of 1 week, there was an extra rule added because they basically got together and they said, well, we just decided that this is something that could have some liability attached to it, so we're just going to have a mandate. We're not going to have this on the cover. So that part got really hairy. But I think the more interesting story to that is that in the merchandising sector, I have some stories I could tell
Please
for
do.
the purposes of non-disclosure. I'm not going to mention any names, but one of them was really surprising to me. It was a feminist apparel company, and I think they're actually out of business now. But a few years ago, they basically came to one of my bosses and they said him to work on this design. And I looked on their website and it literally said like for feminists or for women or by women for women. And it was definitely a feminist bent apparel company. And it was funny because I was doing this and I was thinking to myself, has the irony occurred to them that they're asking a man to do it? So I didn't say anything because I like I said, this was years ago and candidate Trump had still not even emerged. And I did it. And obviously it popped up on some websites and it said, oh my gosh, girl power, look at this. And I remember telling a friend of mine, I said, it made me sick because it's kind of understood that this is how things work, that even in certain segments of the entertainment industry, it's an understood fact that there's a degree of hypocrisy that exists there. And in hindsight, that's one of the things that kind of nauseates me, actually really nauseates me, is that's happened quite a lot where I've been approached by people who frankly I can't stomach. And they had me work on something because they don't know my political tendencies, and I did it because I needed the money. So I know that sounds kind of like a cliche thing. I was young and I needed the money, and that's definitely true with regards to me. So there have been a couple times where I've sold out, especially to entities that I frankly didn't endorse or support. And I just find it ironic whenever I see people walking around and they say, oh, I love it because it's emblematic of the feminist spirit. And I thought, yeah, I'm the one who drew it. And I don't agree with that at all. But yeah, they had to get a guy to do it because they couldn't get anyone else. So that happens. But luckily, as far as comics are concerned, haven't been approached by anything that controversial. Like I said, mostly working and doing IDW variant covers. They're pretty meat and potatoes organization. They focus on writing good comics, and they definitely give their artists a lot of creative leeway in terms of what they do. I don't think there's any book that they have right now that's close to an American Chavez type situation. They do have a couple of books right now that are controversial in recent news, but by and far,
I'm
they actually do pretty well.
I'm gonna interrupt and go out and say I've seen what's been going on with the G.I. Joe franchise, and that's about American Chavez. Yeah.
Yes, that was actually going to be my next question because I remember seeing a tweet from you, Timothy, about the author of the latest G.I. Joe iteration.
Right. Yeah.
Can you shed a little bit of light on that?
That's Aubrey Sitterson, and here's the funny thing about it. I actually did work on one of his books. So I did a gatefold cover for G.I. Joe versus Street Fighter, which was, by the way, it's actually a pretty good book. But in hindsight, it's really funny because Diversity in Comics, they recently did a video where they talked about how in a recent issue of G.I. Joe, Quick Kick defeats Snake Eyes. And it's pretty obvious that it was done because they wanted the Asian guy to beat the white guy. And
I'm calling bullshit on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Here's what I thought. And again, going back to that topic of what it was like being an Asian, a conservative living in the South, just all this weird diversity stuff. I never had Asianness as a characteristic for liking someone. Whenever someone asked me, "Oh, who was your favorite hero growing up?" I said Optimus Prime. I didn't care if he was a white robot or a black robot or an Asian robot. He was a robot. Who cared? And growing up, I liked Snake Eyes. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like Storm Shadow too, but there was never something in my brain that said, hey, you have to like this character because they're Asian, or hey, here's an Asian character. You have to like him because he's Asian. I think that's ridiculous. You like a character because they're cool, because they have qualities and traits that you think are really good.
Mm-hmm.
So he did this podcast recently about Quick Kick defeating Snake Eyes. And then in hindsight, I thought to myself, oh, that explains a lot. Because in G.I. Joe versus Street Fighter, the winner of the tournament was Jinx, the Asian member of the Arashikage clan, who I remember reading it and thinking, like, I scratched my head and thought, Jinx? I mean, like, maybe it was one of those twist endings where the author definitely wanted to pull the rug out and have it be an ending that you didn't see coming. But now, in light of what's been happening as of late, I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, there's probably one of those diversity things where at the time he didn't have the exposure that he does now. He wanted to insert kind of his own politics in there without having it be too obvious. But that gentleman is, I don't know. When you look at what he said, and when you look at what the G.I. Joe fan community is a collective of, it's people who tend to read it because they grew up liking the cartoon, liking the comics, which definitely had a very pro-American slant. And if you have a writer's politics bleed out into the character pages, it's obvious. Like I said, a bad writer, you'll know who they are, because when you read their stories, you don't learn more about the characters. You only learn more about the writer. And when you look at some of the things that he's written lately, and then you match it to his Facebook and his tweets, it becomes kind of glaringly obvious as to where his proclivities lie. And so a lot of the G.I. Joe fans I know, not too happy about it. I was at a Comic-Con recently in New Hampshire just over the weekend, and I had a guy come up to me, and he works at the VA, and he was former Army, and he just went on a tirade. He didn't even know who I was.
He was pissed.
He just saw that I had he saw that I had worked on the book, and so he asked me, "What do you think about G.I. Joe?" And I told him, I said, "Well, it's kind of terrible what was said." And he went on a tirade saying, "I've been collecting G.I. Joe since the Larry Hama days, since the Marvel run.
Yep.
Collected it during Devil's Due, and I am not reading that book anymore. I am cutting my subscription until they do something about that guy, until they fire him. That's it." And so as far as the politics of comics goes, I think that's the only thing that I've been really passionate about. I've been trying to use the Thump Twitter for promotion of the book and basically using it as patriotic retweets and just general memeing. But that was one subject where I felt so passionate about that I feel like they really needed to call him out, because there was just no excusing that as far as his behavior was concerned. And as far as his diminishing and dwindling sales are concerned, I really do think that that's an easily rectifiable situation.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I think we covered a bunch of different topics. Anybody else have any additional questions?
I have one. Is there any way I can convince you to come to the Quad Cities and smack my dad in the head to go get some hearing aids at 77, because he ain't listening to his wife or kids?
Well, what you should do is just bring him to a local audiologist and have him check his hearing. So I think most people are shocked to learn this, but you actually start having hair cell damage at puberty. So you only have perfect to normal hearing up until a certain point, and then gradually hair cells start to die. And obviously, over time, the more hair cells that go away, the worse your hearing loss is. So we actually anticipate that most people in their mid-60s have a degree of it. But the telltale sign is this: if he ever says to you, "I can hear, but I can't understand," that's the key. That is what we hear all the time from people who are convinced that they don't have a hearing loss, is that they feel like they can hear, but they can't understand. And it's because of the way that hearing loss works. It doesn't affect hearing overall. It typically affects specific frequencies. And as a result of that,
I got blessed because he worked at a factory in a town south of the Quad Cities for about 40 years and had to wear the headphones and everything. So he's all, I said, "Hey, Dad, dinner's ready." "Huh?" And I'll say, and then I'll be a smartass, of course, and say, "Yeah, you suck." And he goes, dinner's ready.
Yeah, and the good thing about it is that most hearing aids on the market now are actually really, really good. And depending on your state, they're typically classified as medical devices. And as a result, there's pretty good return policies that most audiologists use that are actually dictated by state licensure laws. And so it's actually a pretty good time right now to look into them. Your hearing aids can get you a lifespan of anywhere between 7 and 14 years, depending on use and care and other factors. So especially at that age, it's definitely worth a look at.
He just does not like to go to the doctor. It's something that me, his wife, and his daughter and his grandkids have all busted. But we busted his chops this past Christmas, and his doctor literally lives right across the street from him. We aren't going to win this one.
Well, the good thing is this. Tell him that when you go to the audiologist, there are no shots.
Speaking of shots, I'm about ready to, and I'm going to show how old I am here. I'm about ready to get a trank gun and shoot his ass like B.A. Baracus and throw him in a airplane and get him flying somewhere.
Well, if you
maybe to Arkansas.
Yeah,
I might have
Arkansas. Yeah, send him to where I work, and we'll see what we can do.
But seriously, no questions from me. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to talk with you, sir.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and when the book comes out, I hope that you and Brett can both come on either on this channel or on the other channel where we had Brett on. We would love to have you guys on again.
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime you guys need us for anything, then you just let us know. And I think you and I are going to be speaking privately about maybe giving you a forward advance copy, just because obviously I think you have a very good channel. It's booming. I've forwarded it to I can't believe how many people already. So hopefully you're seeing an increase in your subscribers as well. But you guys are doing excellent work, very entertaining. I try to catch up with you guys whenever I have some downtime, and especially when I'm working. I do nothing but listen to podcasts all day. Between you, Doug Ernst, Diversity in Comics, and Captain Cummings makes for some very interesting listening material.
All right, great. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to Zero Cool. Thank you to Viper Sword 100, and thank you very much to Dr. Timothy Lim. And thank you, everybody, for tuning into The Finer Print.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.